Have you ever heard a song that just completely shatters your whole idea of what makes music good? Well, today we're talking about a band that does exactly that. A band so unique, so incredibly divisive, that they've been called both the absolute worst and one of the most brilliant groups in history. This is the unbelievable story of the Shaggs.
Okay, so let's just start with this quote because it sounds completely impossible. The legendary experimental musician Frank Zappa is widely believed to have said that the Shaggs were better than the Beatles. I mean, just think about that for a second. The Beatles. How could anyone possibly compare the biggest, most influential band in the world to some totally unknown group of teenagers from rural New Hampshire?
But here's the flip side. Here's the paradox. They've also been described as, literally, one of the worst bands of all time, and in the same breath, a work of unintentional brilliance. I mean, how does that even compute? On the surface, it makes absolutely zero sense. So that's really our big question here. How can one band possibly be both the best and the worst? And to figure it out, we've got to dig into their origin story, which is, well, it's just unbelievable. All right, so let's get into it. Who were the Shaggs, really? Because as you're about to find out, they were not your typical aspiring rock stars. Not even close.
So here they are. Meet the Wiggin sisters. Dorothy, or Dot, on vocals and lead guitar, Betty on rhythm guitar, and Helen on drums. They were just teenagers from this tiny town, Fremont, New Hampshire, and they formed the band back in 1965. But here's the thing. They didn't start this band because they loved music or were dreaming of fame. Nope. The reason why they became a band is where this story just goes completely off the rails. It has absolutely nothing to do with music and everything to do with their father, Austin Wiggin, and a pretty bizarre prophecy. Okay, so get this. As a young man, Austin's mother read his palm and made 3 predictions about his life. She said he'd marry a strawberry blonde woman. She said he'd have 2 sons after she passed away. And she said his daughters would form a famous band. And when the first 2 predictions, boom, actually happened, Austin became absolutely obsessed with making sure that third one came true as well. Now, here's the really rough part. The sisters themselves had 0 interest in music, like none. They didn't know how to play their instruments, and frankly, they didn't really want to learn. But their dad, he just would not let it go. He actually pulled them out of school, bought them instruments, and made them practice for hours and hours every single day. And all of this strange, forced musical education, it eventually leads them to a recording studio in 1969. Their father was dead set on fulfilling that prophecy, so he paid for them to record their one and only album, Philosophy of the World. Their recording session was, by all accounts, a total train wreck. The sisters were so technically unprepared that the professional musicians who were brought in to help them just couldn't follow what they were doing. An engineer later said that after the Shaggs played, the studio staff had to shut the control room doors because they were literally on the floor laughing hysterically. So Austin, their dad, he presses 1,000 copies of this album. 1,000. But, and this is crazy, most sources say the producer only ever gave him about 100 of them. The other 900 just, poof, vanished. The album was a complete and total commercial failure. It basically disappeared the second it was made. And yeah, when you actually listen to it, you kind of get why. The guitars are often completely out of tune. Dot's vocals kind of wander all over the place. And Helen's drumming, well, it seems to be following its own beat, speeding up and slowing down randomly. It sounds like absolutely nothing else. And for years, that was it. Story over, right? Just a strange, failed album from some small town. But the story didn't end there. Not by a long shot. Because somehow, those few copies that actually made it out into the world started to find the right ears. And this slide just shows you the complete 180-degree turn in their reputation. What was once dismissed as miserable and literally laughed at was later called stunningly awful wonderful by Rolling Stone magazine. Their sound went from being a joke to being called pure and unaffected. That initial train wreck was now being seen as something really authentic and original. But look, this didn't happen overnight. It took decades. The album got a reissue in 1980, which brought it to a whole new audience of critics and artists. And then, the big one. In the 90s, Kurt Cobain, Kurt Cobain, listed it as one of his favorite albums of all time. That celebrity endorsement totally sealed their cult status, and incredibly, it all led to a sold-out reunion show in 2017.
So what happened? What changed? Why did the world suddenly start appreciating what was once considered unlistenable? Well, the answer is that the Shaggs became the poster children for a whole new genre, a whole new way of thinking about music, known as outsider music.
Basically, outsider music flips the whole script. It says, hey, technical skill isn't everything. What really matters is authenticity and raw honesty. It celebrates artists who are self-taught, who are making art without any of the usual rules. And with this new way of looking at it, the Shaggs' untuned guitars and their weird rhythms, suddenly they weren't mistakes anymore. They were proof that this was real.
And that's their real legacy, you know? They accidentally became pioneers. They're now called the unwitting godmothers of outsider music for creating something so completely honest, mostly because they literally didn't know how to do it any other way. Their unique sound went on to inspire other musicians, and their unbelievable life story has even been turned into a stage musical.
So we come all the way back to our original question, but maybe with a new perspective now. The Shaggs force us to ask ourselves, what is art anyway? Is it about perfect execution and mastering your craft? Or is it about raw honesty and having a unique, unfiltered vision? The story of the best worst band ever suggests the answer, well, it isn't quite so simple.